So we have a new proposal by the Iranians to Trump, to the US, to finally find a ceasefire. Let's see what's going to happen on that front. And at the same time, we're going to be analyzing what's going to happen with the American economy. How much is this war actually costing the US? Or the role of Russia in all of this, how Russia is backing Iran, and they're both hurting the US economy. Let's find out. Hello, everybody. My name is Stavros. This is Black Flag Media. I'm a professor of international relations and advocate for democracy. Today, it's Sunday, the 3rd of May, and this is going to be more regular. We're going to be broadcasting from here every other day in this channel. So, I think that this is going to be a great opportunity to talk about these issues that affect everybody and have a global audience, openly discuss about these topics. This is an independent YouTube channel. This means that, yes, I'm a professor of international relations, I'm commenting, I'm analyzing things, but I'm not being influenced by any ideology. I'm not supporting any part of any of these conflicts. I'm just trying to illustrate what the international law has to say about something, what countries are saying from a realist perspective. So I'm just going to give you like the raw data and my cold hard analysis on what's going on. So I think you're going to be enjoying these analyses. So let's begin by talking about Trump. He received a new peace proposal. So remember, there was an initial proposal by the Iranians for a permanent ceasefire. It was a 10-point deal. The Americans didn't like that. They rejected that. Then the Americans reverted with a 9-point deal to the Iranians. That didn't work out for Tehran. And now the Iranians came back with a new proposal, a 14-point peace plan. I'll talk more about it in a minute. But what Trump said, he's reviewing this proposal. He said, I'm going to tell you more about it. They're going to be giving me the raw text of this proposal, but I'm warning the Iranians, don't do anything nasty. If you misbehave, I'm going to restart the airstrikes again. So he's threatening them with further action. At the same time that we have diplomacy, we have the threat of violence. So he was boarding Air Force One in Florida, and he did confirm that he received this deal. And he said that if the Iranians do something bad, there is a possibility it could happen, meaning if strikes would resume. So yes, he also said that the U.S. is doing perfectly fine, very well, as he said so. We'll talk more about that. I sincerely doubt about it. And he also claimed that Iran is now desperate for settlement because the country has been decimated by months of conflict and a naval blockade. I seriously doubt it. I don't think he knows what he's talking about, or he either doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's not actually judging the situation correctly, evaluating the situation correctly in Tehran. They have not been decimated. The regime is still standing. The country is still operational. Actually, when it was when it was bombarded in the second round of attacks a couple of weeks ago, we saw how the war crimes, actually, when the U.S. started bombing civilian infrastructure like bridges. This is a war crime. So after that, we saw some major constructors in the country and builders in the country. They started rebuilding these bridges, pro bono. They volunteered and they gave freely their raw materials like cement, and they rebuilt these bridges in no time. So yeah, the country is not decimated. Quite the contrary, the regime is more stronger than ever. And regarding the naval blockade and all that, I want to remind you that in the first round of the first term of Trump, this was back in 2018, the country was really, really targeted again by the Republican president. Iran was really targeted, but they did manage. They could not export anything. Again, one would say that they were decimated as well, but they were not. They did manage. They have a capacity to withstand these attacks, this crisis, and these economic sanctions and naval blockades, more so than we have in the West to withstand what's going to happen with the price of the oil, actually. So Trump, I guess he did read, or somebody explained to him. I don't know if he actually reads these things, but somebody explained to him what this deal is all about, and he said it is difficult to imagine that the Iranian proposal would be acceptable to him because Iran, quote, has not yet paid a big enough price for what they have done to humanity in the world over the last 14 years. I mean, what did they do to humanity? Can you explain to us? What, they're not your lackeys? They don't like to be bullied from Washington or from Tel Aviv? What's the thing that they did that they want to be independent? Again, I do not accept, condone, or support an Iranian Islamic regime, which is like coming to us from the Dark Ages. It's really backwards and dark, to be honest. But that doesn't mean that from a foreign relations perspective, everybody has to be a puppet of Washington. That's of the imperialists of the world, right? What is Washington doing over the last 47 years? Has anybody asked that? With the illegal wars, the invasions, the illegal invasion, for instance, of Iraq, with the lies of the criminal and the crook named George Bush and the other criminal, Dick Cheney. They said allegedly they were weapons of mass destruction. They were the weapons of mass destruction. Their own party or their own ideas, or they themselves are weapons of mass destruction definitely against the people and the civilians of Iraq, and probably against the whole world. What did they do against Yugoslavia? They dismembered this country. They created puppet countries like Kosovo and Bosnia, made up countries that there's always the threat of ethnic violence. What did you guys do in the past 47? You guys are the problem. I mean, right now, you guys are the global problem, not the Iranians. And you have been for the last more than 47 years, actually. So let's see what Tehran's 14-point plan actually calls for. They want to they want the U.S. naval blockade to be lifted. Obviously, the naval blockade limits the Iranian exports mainly to China, the oil exports. They want war reparations. Again, they want to be paid for what they suffer, because again, the illegal war of the Zionists and the Christian Zionists, actually, the Christian Zionists is the alliance between Washington and Tel Aviv. This illegal war that was launched, it needs to be, somebody needs to pay for these damages. And the Iran, I think, haven't read the actual point plan. It hasn't been published yet, not leaked. Neither leaked. So I think that what they have been saying in the previous rounds is that, you can either pay us as a war reparation, or we can get the money through having some tariffs being paid to us from the Strait of Hormuz for any passing vessel, right? So that's the idea. Millions of dollars should be paid from any passing vessel, like $2 million per vessel, something like that. That's what they hope for. That's what the Iranians are working on, and that is the idea of the war reparations. Also, they're saying that we need to have our frozen assets be released. Again, the U.S. has illegally frozen Iranian assets, and Tehran says, we need these assets back to us because they are stolen. Also, they're saying that they want a 30-day window to finalize the terms of this peace, a timeline which is, I don't know if Washington wants to accept that because they want a longer transition. Well, maybe that's not a problem. I don't know. But because the U.S. has requested a 2-month ceasefire, but Iran says, we need to resolve this ASAP. We need to fix it, and we shouldn't be extending the ceasefire, but we should end the war, basically something different. The ceasefire is the war exists, but we're not fighting. Ending the war means peace, basically, that there's no war between us. Again, some other elements here from the 14-point plan is guarantees of non-aggression, that the U.S. will not simply, decide to legally attack again. This is, they couldn't justify this war. The Americans could not justify the war. So, they can just attack again with no justification. The Iranians want the U.S. military forces to withdraw from the areas surrounding Iran, meaning from the Gulf countries. This is going to be really problematic because the military footprint that the Americans have in the region is what made them capable to attack Iran in the first place. So leaving the area would be a major strategic defeat for the U.S. I would say that this whole war is a major strategic defeat for the U.S. And also, the Iranians are saying that we need to end the war on all fronts, including Lebanon. And they want a new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz. I guess what I told you guys, that they want to control who gets in, who gets out, and they should get paid for maintaining these services, to make sure that everybody gets in and out safely. That's how they would frame it, I guess. So at the same time that they have given this proposal to Trump, because Trump is not, he is not to be trusted. Obviously, he backstabbed them 2 times, last year in June, and right now when the last round of attacks. The Iranians were, in both instances, they were discussing, they were negotiating on a diplomatic level, and the Americans and the Jews, they just attacked them, they stabbed them in the back, which is again something that illustrates how much these regimes have fallen from grace. They're not to be trusted. Politically and diplomatically speaking, they are extremely, I would say, aggressive, and they're not, their word has no meaning. Actually, Trump's word, even though basically mostly he's lying all the time, but even if he's not, that's a weakness. Trump thinks that by being unpredictable is one of his assets and strengths, but in this instance, nobody can trust him. So even if he says we're not going to be attacking you again, you're chaotic, you are uncontrollable, unpredictable. Nobody, nobody knows if you're if you're sane enough or if you believe what you're saying. So there cannot nobody can trust them for what's going to happen next, and possibly that is. It seems that this is a problem, not an asset. This is a liability for the U.S. diplomatic team. So at the same time, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they said that we remain full standby for a return to hostilities because, again, the U.S. did not commit to previous treaties. They violated them. Yes, the U.S. is known from this point on as a country which violates its treaties. They're not to be trusted. They're 100% untrustworthy. And also, it's interesting, the fact that Trump is saying that this naval blockade that they're doing is very profitable business. So they're making money. I don't know who's they. The U.S., his family, he himself, his kids, I don't know. But yeah, they have been profiteering illegally based on what's going on. I watched the video. It was on X. And Trump is saying, he's joking, he's half joking, I guess. And he's saying that we stole a vessel, an Iranian vessel from the Gulf, and we stole their cargo, and it's pretty lucrative business, and it's like we're like kind of pirates. It seems like we're kind of pirates in a way, and he's laughing, but that's exactly what they are. That's exactly what Tehran is calling them. The Iranians are calling the Americans pirates, and they are filthy pirates in what they're doing, stealing their another country's oil, and which is an illegal naval blockade, and this act is an act of war. At the same time that they're saying, no, we're negotiating, they're committing acts of war against Iran. Actually, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Iran, they said that this is a damning admission of piracy, and they're right. They're 100% right. At the same time, though, it seems that some Iranian vessels, they have managed to evade the U.S. blockade. They sneaked past the blockade, and according to tankertrackers.com, yes, listen to this, an Iranian supertanker managed to evade the blockade and reached the Asia Pacific while carrying more than 1.9 million barrels of crude oil. This is a value of $220 million, actually. So some of these troops have managed to sneak past, which is, this is interesting, right? So it means that they're trying, it means that it's, the Iranians think it's worth it to risk it, because these, 220 million, I guess it's worth it, but I don't know how many ships they have been able to snuck out and how many ships they have lost to this blockade. All right. Trump is saying, actually, let me also add this. He's saying that we cannot find a solution or a common understanding with Iranians because they themselves cannot agree on what their position should be. He's saying that the Iranians have tremendous infighting and confusion. Basically, he's saying that there's infighting inside the Iranian regime, inside the Islamic Republic, and that is why he didn't send envoys to Islamabad, Pakistan. No, that's not why. It's because the Iranians said, we don't like what you guys are saying. We don't like that you are blockading us, so we will be dictating terms. Iran wants to dictate terms, and there's no confusion. There's no infighting. They have been consistently providing a plan to the Americans. They had the 10-point plan, and the Americans rejected it. Then somebody in the Iranian regime rejected the 9-point plan that the Americans gave them, and now we have a 14-point. So it seems that there's, I would say that there's more infighting inside Donald Trump's, especially the military against the political elites. we see how many people from the military have been either basically not resigning, but they're getting fired. So I would say that the Americans are more confused and they suffer from infighting more so than the Iranians. Okay. All right. Let's see now. So it seems that it's pretty lucrative. I would say that for the U.S., the whole war was pretty lucrative. I just read that the U.S. has now approved a $8.6 billion package in major arms deals and military support for many countries in the Gulf like Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and obviously Israel. So yes, they're making big buck out of this war. It's pretty clear. And not only that, the U.S. State Department, meaning Secretary Marco Rubio, he said that we have emergency circumstances and we need to fast track these sales to make big buck. So we do not need the approval of Congress. This is debatable. From a U.S. Constitution perspective, this is debatable. The same way that it's debatable whether the U.S. needs the green light by Congress to maintain this naval blockade. Let me remind you that a U.S. president can initiate war actions against the country if he feels that the country or its interests or its assets are threatened. And that's what they did. Basically, they said that before this war started, they said that the Iranians were about to attack us in the Middle East, which is a lie. The U.S. intelligence said that was not coming. Was not forthcoming. But anyway, so Trump said that because we're going to be attacked, we have to attack first, and he attacked. But you cannot, even if you're a U.S. president, you cannot maintain a war for more than 60 days. So after 60 days, you need approval from Congress to maintain war activities or war acts. And actually, he said that because there's a ceasefire, we don't need congressional agreement or green light to maintain whatever we're doing. No, you do. You do because the naval blockade is a war act. It's exactly what it's an act of war, rather. That's what it is. The same way that abducting people or abducting vessels, launching attacks on their engines and then stealing these vessels, this is an act of war. Stealing their cargo is an act of war. And a naval blockade is a staple. It's a clear act of war according to international law and the UN Charter, right? This is what an act of war looks like, blockading a country. This is like a siege. It's a naval siege. That's what it is. So if you're saying that a naval blockade is not an act of war, you're saying basically that a siege of a city is not an act of war, which is lunacy. It's a joke. So yes, he is waging war. So it's debatable. Also, it's debatable whether this fast track sale needs to be avoid Congress altogether because it's emergent. It's an emergency because what? Because you're afraid there's going to be a new round of attacks based on your actions. So the emergency to protect these countries in the Gulf is coming from Washington itself. It's an emergency only because Washington aims to illegally to illegally maintain this war without congressional authorization and to illegally attack against Iran. That's the only reason why it would be an emergency to sell these arms to these countries in the Middle East without Congress voting on it. Right? That's the only reason. So it's illegal, I would say, from any point that you try and understand what is happening. So let's see what the U.S. is selling, because again, remember Dwight Eisenhower, he described the so-called military-industrial complex, how the defense companies make big buck from these sales, from these wars, and how these defense companies really donate money to politicians, and they control many of them. Through donations, fundraisings, these defense companies, they get paid by the U.S. Citizen, by the taxpayer, and this amount of money, most of it gets into their pockets, but some of this money manages to reach the pockets of politicians, such as Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, etc. So obviously there is a conflict of interest, I would say, clearly. When you're waging wars and the defense industry is paying you, they're paying you to wage wars, right? So let's see what they're selling to these countries. For instance, they're selling the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. I hate these names. These gang-ho, G.I. Joe, disgusting names like kill. What's a kill weapon system? It's obviously all weapons kill, but to name it as such, it tells everybody how cruel you are, right? How disgusting and monstrous you are. So the APKWS, Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System, is something that they're selling. They're transferring this and related equipment to Israel for almost $1 billion. And also they're selling battle command systems to Kuwait for $2.5 billion as well. Let me say also that there's actually Kuwait. They have not export anything, 0 barrels of oil for the first time in 35 years. This is huge. During this war, Kuwait have exported 0 barrels of oil, and this is the first for many decades. You can imagine how disruptive this has been for the U.S. allies. They're paying a price, and now they're paying the U.S., which tells you how corrupt these regimes are in the Gulf. They don't, right? So they have donated personally, like Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, personally to Trump. They have gifted him, the jumbo jets, money, bracelets, I don't know, like dresses, whatever. They have donated money directly to his family, to the country, to the economy of the U.S. And what they got in return? Devastated. They got devastated. That's what they got. The U.S. bases were destroyed. People died in this country, and now they're paying for more. Why? Because these countries are not democracies. They're not even republics. We call democracy democracy is different than a republic. Democracy, it's a participatory system. So republic is something where you have representatives. They don't even have representatives. They're monarchies, which is like extremely backwards and old-fashioned in a bad way. So Qatar also they're going to be buying these APKWSs. Again, the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. Jesus. It gives me the goosebumps. They're also going to be restocking its Patriot air and missile defense systems. Remember, they use them to shoot down the Iranian Shahed drones and the Iranian missiles. And they're going to be paying for all of these it's going to cost them $5 billion. Listen to this. And then the UAE also, they have been cleared to buy an APKWS for $148 million. So yes, they said that the U.S. State Department said we provided a detailed justification, quote unquote, this is a joke, for the emergency, because this is in the national security interest of the United States to bypass congressional review process. Sure thing. Yeah, I really doubt it. So I'm just reading here that this APKWS is a kit that equips Hydra 770 unguided rockets with laser guidance and makes them precision-guided munitions. So these are unguided rockets that become precision-guided rockets with these systems. So they're basically upgrading their rockets with these systems. The Gulf states, that is. Okay. Also, the battle command systems for Kuwait will improve the country's air defense detection with radar, according to the State Department. And the State Department also sold back in March. They approved another package, separate package than one that I'm discussing right now. They said that they're going to be selling arms worth almost $17 billion. Listen to these numbers, to the UAE, Kuwait, and Jordan. Jordan also is going on the buying side. They're going to be buying stuff from the U.S. as well during this war. Again, this is a war made by the defense, but by the military-industrial complex, along with Israel, Mossad, and the CIA, for these people, these crooks, these warmongers and war criminals to enrich themselves. It's clear as day, right? You can tell. Listen to this. The deal includes drone, missiles, radar systems, and some F-16s for the UAE. And also they sold air and missile defense radar systems for Kuwait back in March. And, there's a problem, obviously, for the U.S. as well, because they did use heavily used munitions in this war against Iran. They have been degrading their capacity to fight against China in a possible conflict in the Asia-Pacific theater, maybe against Taiwan, whatever. The U.S. actually has admitted that it's going to take 6 years to replenish their stocks that they used against Iran. For what? For nothing. The regime is still in place. Let me again repeat that the U.S. actually, I would call what happened in Iran a strategic defeat, because the regime is standing. The only thing that could stop the Iranian nuclear program, their ballistic program, they're chanting death to Israel and death to the U.S., the slogans, supporting proxies. in the Middle East, such as Hezbollah or the Houthis. The only thing that would stop that, it would be to defeat the regime, topple the regime. The regime has not been toppled. The regime is standing. It's alive. We have a new Khamenei, a younger version of Khamenei. Ali Khamenei was assassinated. Then we have Mustafa Khamenei right now. So the regime is standing. And I would say that the most radical, hardcore, conservative elements of the regime, so the regime has been strengthened. They have been strengthened, so it's the exact opposite of what might hope from the U.S. side. So again, for nothing or for worsening their position in the Middle East against allies, against the petro monarchies in the Middle East, they sacrificed their ability to fight China in the case of a war over Taiwan. I would say for, it seems, 6 years or more, they need to replenish their stocks in that part of the world, it seems. Yeah. So yeah, they still have enough stockpiles for the war of Iran, but they would need more for an adversary, a serious adversary such as China. Pre-war inventories for the U.S. were already insufficient. And right now, the levels, it seems that they would constrain what the U.S. can do, their operations, what they would look like if we had a future conflict again against the Chinese. Okay, great, awesome stuff. So yeah, and let me also tell you what Pete Tech said. So he appeared in a congressional hearing. He tried to justify what he has been doing. He's incapable. He's actually a nobody. He was covering the news. He used to be a major in the U.S. Army, but he's not a knowledgeable person. He's a joke, actually. And he said that the cost of the war thus far has been $25 billion only, which is a lie, right? In a fiery congressional hearing, it was illustrated that what this guy was saying is a joke. You can imagine how the cost of a 60 days conflict, it's not 25 billion so far. It seems, first of all, he could not explain why did this war start, right? He said that, for instance, at the beginning, it was because of a preemptive strike, because the U.S. bases were targeted, and that is why. And then they had to defend Israel. As the State Department said, we have to defend our allies. Then they said that the Iranians have a nuclear ambition, even though the nuclear problem was devastated, as Trump was saying. He was lying. Last June, they were not. The program is not devastated. They still have their material, the enriched uranium. They still have their technology. That's still there. And then they switched gears. They switched narratives, and the U.S. said, or the administration said, that the Iranians have a shield of conventional missiles, so we need to take down the missiles or the whatever. That's a joke. They cannot make any narrative stick. The problem for the U.S. is that, according to some representatives, so Representative Ro Khanna in the U.S. Congress, he said, for instance, that this war is, it seems that it's going to cost $631 billion, according to estimations by the Democrats, probably like $1 trillion. It seems that, for instance, Linda Biles, which is a leading Harvard economist, they said that it's going to cost almost probably close to $1 trillion. That's what, again, Linda Biles, what she said. She is a leading Harvard economist. So it seems that it's going to cost a lot. And we did see oil prices rising higher than $120 a barrel. This is driving U.S. petrol prices to a 4-year high. So we're talking about a 40% rise in gas prices as well. This is what leads President Trump to suffer in his approval ratings. He has a record low in his second term. It seems that only 20% of Americans approve of Trump's handling of the cost of living. There's a cost of living crisis right now, and it's going to become even worse come next year. There's going to be huge inflation. Everybody's going to pay for the cost of what's happening right now. Next year, food prices are going to go up, oil prices as well. And, it has been destructive for the U.S. economy. The U.S. fired more Patriot missiles, listen to this, in the first 4 days of the Iran war to defend their bases. Well, their bases were destroyed, though, by the Iranians, so they failed. So they fired more Patriot missiles in the first 4 days of the Iranian war than they supplied to Ukraine over the past 4 years. Can you imagine that? For days more Patriot missiles than they supplied to Ukraine over the past 4 years. And each of these missiles cost $4 million to make. And they were shooting down Iran's Shahed drones. They're worth, I don't know, $50,000 each, maybe less. So you can tell what kind of joke this is. So this is a big problem for the U.S. and this war. There's no agreement inside, as we discussed. And the Trump administration, they have been asking for $1.5 trillion for defense next year for the budget. This is, listen to this, a 42% increase, or I would say this is the largest U.S. increase in their military budget since World War II. So we're talking what, World War III numbers now? This is what they're doing. This is what they're destroying their country and their economy. They're destroying definitely the Western economy. Everybody's suffering, and they're destroying the world's economy. Every human is suffering by these oil spikes. In the Philippines or in other parts of Asia, they have been trying to deal with rationing energy. So everybody's trying to do something about it. Of what Trump and Netanyahu, these evil forces, are doing to the world. For what? They have nothing to show for it. Also, they need to reconstruct and repair their damaged assets in the region. Remember, when the Iranians started attacking U.S. military facilities and embassies in the Gulf region, they destroyed, basically, as the New York Times said, half of the U.S. bases in the region are in ruins. People are not telling you this, but the New York Times said so, that half of the U.S. military bases in the region are in ruins, such as the U.S. military camps in Kuwait, other military bases like the Al Dhafra base, the Al Ruwais military base in the UAE. In Saudi, we have the Prince Sultan Air Base. Again, it was targeted. In Jordan, the Muwafaq Salti Air Base. All of these bases have been destroyed. Again, the New York Times said they estimated that only to repair the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet, which is in Manama, Bahrain, this would cost only $200 million alone, right? And then NBC News, this is a U.S. outlet, they quoted 6 U.S. officials that they said that Iran damaged U.S. military bases and equipment in the Middle East. This is far worse than publicly acknowledged, and that the damage alone could lead to billions of dollars in repairs. This is huge. So the American politicians were trying to grill Hegseth. Again, this guy is a joke. He's a crook. He's a circus person. He is trying to juggle his way out of this mess, this debacle. And he didn't say, whether this figure that he gave, the $25 billion, if this is going to include the repairing damage to U.S. assets, U.S. bases. Basically, it does not include. I can clearly tell. He said that we don't have the final number for what the damage is to our installation overseas. So obviously, if you don't have the number, you're not including that to what you feel how much this war costs you. So obviously, it's going to be more costs coming. And he also said that we're still assessing what we want to construct in the future. So maybe we're going to leave some of these bases in ruins, or maybe they will have to leave some of these countries, which is going to be a huge blow. It would be destructive to their not only their military footprint, but their public image as well. It would be a tremendous blow to their reputation if they pack up and leave from the Middle East or from some countries because Iran said so, right? So they're trying to say, maybe our partners want to contribute a share for that construction. So maybe, the UAE wants to pay for some of these bases. Probably some of these countries would want to. I don't know if they can support that, though, by both buying weapons from the U.S., both paying for these bases to be reconstructed and then become targets again in the future. Maybe you can say that we would like you to scale down your presence in our country so we don't have to pay this kind of money again in the future. So I don't know if Gulf countries, they're really corrupt regimes in their own. So maybe they would like to pay for that. I don't know. Again, they have been giving gifts to Trump, even personally. So it seems that this is going to be a huge, I would say it's going to be more than that. So I was reading, this Harvard Kennedy School public finance professor that I mentioned before, he had estimated back in 2006 that the Iraq war would cost the U.S. $3.3 trillion actually. And at the time, the George Bush administration was telling the U.S. public, no, it's going to cost only $50 billion. So again, $50 billion. And it seems that what actually ended up, it was closer to what Biles said, because at the end of the day, the Iraq war almost costed, the estimation was $2 trillion. So, and if you add the cost of inflation and all of that, the collateral cost that most of the times we cannot actually measure, it seems that it was closer to 3 trillion. So she was right back then, and I bet she's right now. You can be optimistic, or the administration can be optimistic, but it seems that from what we know, it's going to be closer to $1 trillion this time around, this war. Even from short-term war, we get these long-term expenses, veterans care, not only restocking weapons industry, but veterans care, caring for the veterans, rehabilitation, all of that, psychological support, all of that. It's going to come close to $1 trillion for what? Again, nothing to show for. All right. So I have some time left here, and I'd like to talk a little bit about Russia and what they have provided the Iranians. I think this is also interesting. Not only, so yeah, the Russians, they are fighting their own war against Ukraine, right? They cannot support Iran militarily. They can give them some assistance by providing them with targeting information, like give them targets in the Middle East. That's how the Iranians managed to target these U.S. bases, as I said. So this is valuable, extremely valuable. They have not weapons to spare. So that's not something that's happened. But also they're supporting them politically and diplomatically. Moscow also obviously has been gaining money from these oil spikes. They have been selling more oil to China. And with the increase in the prices. But I would say that the Russians are trying to look at things in a long-term basis. So what they do want is they want to resolve they're afraid that if this situation maintains, we do have the same demand in the market, but if we see more crisis, or the crisis becomes longer to resolve, more people would start rationing, or being more on defensive with regards to their oil consumption. So maybe we'll see the demand falling down as well, right? Supply fell down from the Gulf, but demand is still the same. If demand falls down, that's going to create problem for the price of the oil. So Moscow is afraid of that. So they do want to resolve this conflict and try and avoid the negative consequences here. What would be a negative consequence? A potential humanitarian crisis in Iran, a humanitarian crisis that Russia would have to support them, or maybe a global economic slowdown, as I said, because of the high energy prices. And so people stop, there's a drop in demand globally. Also, Russian companies have been extremely active and have been expanding in the region in recent years, so in the Gulf. So this war is not good for their business in the Gulf. At the same time, Russia has been supporting Iran by helping them to achieve a more favorable diplomatic position based on what people thought about them before the war. I would say that they have more goodwill, and many countries, like NATO countries, they were reluctant to participate in supporting the U.S. troops. We have a big debate, a big difference between Merz and Trump. Basically, Chancellor Merz of Germany, he actually said that the U.S. was humiliated by Iran, and he's right. And obviously we had the repercussions. Trump said we're going to be removing some of our forces, 5,000 troops from Germany, as a payback for that. So his revenge came fast, but he was really upset because what Merz said is right. Yeah, the U.S. was humiliated, but European NATO allies, they did not participate in demining operations in Strait of Hormuz. Removing the mines. They were not involved in the conflict. So I would say that the U.S. and Israel, obviously, they have been more isolated after this war than they were before, and the Iranian regime is less isolated than they were before the war, right? So I would say that the U.S. and specifically their allies, they're more weakened rather than strengthened, especially from a security perspective after this war, right? So Washington does have many allies, but their effective support, it seems that it's not as clear anymore as it used to be. Okay, what else? Also, Russia is helping from a diplomatic perspective. The Iranians, they did support him in the UN Security Council. They say that we believe that it's unacceptable to enforce any sanctions against Iran. So any sanctions or naval blockade will be basically not only just from the West, basically only from the Americans against the Iranians, which makes it extremely illegal. Whatever, anything that doesn't come from the UN Security Council, it's bilateral, it's unilateral in the sense only by the US, and it's illegal 100%. And this is something that is being secured by the Russian and the Chinese veto in the UN Security Council. Okay. It seems also interestingly that the U.S. military operation, even though it was a large-scale operation, it did fail to achieve a rapid and decisive result, a political result. So yeah, they did change the dynamics, but it seems clear that mere threats of force by the American president are not sufficient anymore, right? The threat still carries some weight, but it's extremely limited, especially when you're dealing with a regional power such as Iran. It seems that they could not, the threat alone has no value at the end of the day. So the US failed, they would have to recalibrate in the future, maybe against other countries. Against China, things would be even more difficult. But I would say that it seems that they would have to include other, maybe hybrid warfare against Iran in the future. So other means to enhance the effectiveness of their military and their military capabilities. But again, this is a big lesson for both the US, I would say for everybody. They dealt with, I would say, a regional power. This is not a global power yet, but Iran may actually become one if Trump keeps pushing them. But it seems that, again, this is a big new thing that we realized for the first time in a long while, a large-scale US military operation. It failed to achieve what the US president had in mind. This is huge. And this, again, creates a blow to the US reputation. What do you guys think? I would love to hear your thoughts and your opinions. Please do write them down in the comments. If you did like this video, like, share, and subscribe. And until next one, thank you. So I'd like to discuss a little bit because, again, I'm based in Athens. I'm monitoring Greece, obviously, as well. And we have some news regarding a deal that Greece had with Ukraine. So we did have a deal. Supposedly, we had a deal. Everybody thought we had a deal. We were negotiating, actually, for the joint production of naval drones. It seems that this discussion has stopped. It has been paused. Listen to this. Because Ukraine, they want to retain control over how we, meaning the Greeks, how can we use this technology. This is crazy. They want to dictate us how and against whom we would be using our drones. So we would be jointly, constructing these drones. Ukraine would supply us with components, and these drones would be built in shipyards in Greece. Greek companies would manufacture electronic and optical systems. So we would have some versions like the Magura type attack drones, again, like that. But it seems that the Ukrainian officials demanded that Kiev retain a say over how the Greek military would use the drones. So I guess we would not be allowed by the Ukrainians to use these drones against Turkey because Turkey is a major ally of the Ukraine, which is crazy. Turkey has been providing with support and a safe line for the Russians to travel to the West, to Europe, or to do business to Europe. They're selling products, the Russians, through Turkey. So in essence, they're fighting. The Turks are helping the Russians to fight against the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainian corrupt regime, they want us to tell them, that we're not going to attack the Turks with our own drones. That's crazy. That's lunacy. Who are these people? Who do you think these people are?